Thank you all for attending today's event. I'm going to read out these notes just to make sure that I cover everything that I wanted to say, because we are here today to mark the opening of the Lemanopolis Gallery in its newly renovated location. We will shortly hear Dr. Bob Bianchi's talk about Dionysos between Osiris and Christ. And let me introduce Dr. Bianchi to you. Robert Stephen Bianchi Fasani is a critical art historian, classicist, Egyptologist, and archaeologist. He's better known to most as Dr. Bob. He's currently the chief curator at the Ancient Egyptian Museum, Shibuya in Tokyo, Japan. And previously, he served on the curatorial staffs of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Hildesheim Museum in Germany, the Biblelands Museum in Jerusalem, and Fondation Galdour pour l'Art in Geneva, Switzerland. He had previously received his PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU and has joined some 15 archaeological excavations in the Nile Delta at Karnak and Saqqara near the Great Pyramids. He has published about several dozen books, written 60 essays, and nearly 250 articles. You even may have seen him in one of over 100, and I think 120 now, TV documentaries as one of the experts talking about subjects like Alexandria or Egyptian mummification, about Tutankhamun or Cleopatra. I know Bob from my time at the Albert Pierson Museum in Amsterdam, where we worked together on several research projects and exhibition plans. We continue to collaborate on a number of academic publications on ancient seal impressions, animals in ancient material culture, and the Egyptian guardian demon known as Bes. Bob lives in Holiday, Florida with his wife Anna, who unfortunately cannot join us today. They have supported the museum for years and have donated several antiquities, one of which is currently on view in the Prelude exhibition upstairs. I'm truly fortunate to count Bob as my friend. Today, Dr. Bob will enlighten us on various possible relationships between Dionysus and the Egyptian god of the dead, Osiris, and with Christian religion. Today's Antiquities Circle lecture is celebrating the opening of the major reinstallation of our Antiquities collection in the Lemanopolis Gallery entitled Life and Death in the Ancient World, as Brittany already pointed out. This lecture is generously sponsored by Charles Stangish and Marine Bellion. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for...
Just one white.
The arrow.
The arrow.
Or space bar.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. I'm a little bit humbled, I must say, and a little bit embarrassed. You introduced me to the first lecture for 2022-23, and this is the first time that so many antiquities from this particular museum have been on view. So I'm giving a lecture to introduce Branko's curatorial skills as doing this wonderful exhibition and putting so many antiquities on view. And I hope if you get a chance to look at it, you'll understand that there's more than just Greek vases in the Tampa Museum of Art. The exhibition is really spectacular. I had a couple minutes before I came down here to give the lecture to see that with Branko at my side and his wife, Clara. I appreciate that. You have to forgive me, I'm absolutely computer illiterate here. So what arrow am I pushing? This one on, okay.
Right there.
I'll try it. Of all of the myths of ancient Egypt, the myth of Osiris is probably the most well-known because he has a rather interesting demise. What I want to do this afternoon is to look at the three individuals, Osiris, Dionysus, and then the figure of Christ, to try to see if we can find connective tissues that unite the three of them together in some way. And in Branko's introduction, he very, very pointedly said, probable connection. That's a very, very important thing. So we begin with the birth of Osiris. There's nothing spectacular about it. His father is the earth god Geb, shown here aroused in green. His mother is Nut. He is one of several children. Isis, who was going to be his wife, is one of those children is born with him, a sibling. So nothing spectacular. He is born the way most human beings are born. The key factor in his life is his run-in with his evil brother Seth, often defined as a typhonic kind of a person, and they have a battle for supremacy. And it's very, very interesting when you read the literature that the Egyptians are sometimes not very, very Aristotelian in the way they gather their data. So according to some versions of the legends, Osiris was 28 years old when this conflict occurred. According to others, it was during his 28th year. Lay your bets down, make your choices. 28 is a key element, but we're not sure to what it refers. And in the process of the struggle, Osiris is dismembered, and he's cut to pieces into 42 pieces, which are scattered up and down the length and breadth of Egypt. Osiris's dutiful wife, Isis, who's also his sister, by the way, goes around and tries to pick the pieces up so she can put him together. And there are various versions about how this collection process works. Here at Dendera, for example, Isis is enabled by representations of personifications of all of the 42 nomes or districts of Egypt in which a body part fell. And they picked up the body part and they put it in a jar, not to be confused as a canopic jar, it's a vessel. And they're bringing the body parts so that Isis can magically put them together again. And there are some people that would argue that what we're looking here with the jars having body parts are precursors of what is the medieval tradition of reliquaries for body parts of Christian saints. Now, the interesting thing about Egyptian art is it's very similar to Greek art in that violent action is never actually portrayed. In the Greek world, the phrase is used, a pregnant moment. You know that Oedipus, for example, is going to blind himself. When Oedipus appears on stage, he's always blinded. And the same thing happens in Egypt. We don't see Osiris being dismembered. We don't see his body parts being scattered. We don't actually see his wife picking the body parts up and putting them together. We know he's going to get killed. We know the body parts are being brought back, and we know the body parts are going to be assembled. And what we have here in the Temple of Seti I of the Abydos, dated about 1200 BC, are two episodes in that story. On the top, we have the body of Osiris, and he's starting to be aroused. He's quickening. And in the scene below, we have the actual inception, the posthumous creation of Horus. But the Egyptians are very, very reluctant to show you anything that's X-rated on IMAX. So in these particular scenes, which are larger than the screen on which it's projected, Isis is in the form of a kite or a bird of prey, and she's perched on the aroused member of her husband, who's been revived, as if she's perching on a tree. So we have this concealment here. And the interesting contrast to make is that when you get an object in Egypt that's small in scale, like this faience figurine in Munich, it's only about that big, I can hold it in my hand. They have no compunction about showing you the sex act because it is a small personal object. When it becomes bigger than life, they're a little bit reticent and a little bit more prudish and a little bit more cautionary. The second thing you have to understand is they don't care about narrative sequence. So if you look at the two scenes that are here, Horus, who is not yet born, is experiencing and a witness to his own conception. So we have to remember when we look at Egyptian art, it's not what we look at when we see Greek art, but that's the remembering. And when Osiris is dead, he becomes the ruler of the afterlife, and he becomes associated with grapes. And here's where people start to play all kinds of mind games, have free associated exercises. We have here a Dynasty 18, about 1300 BC, scene of Osiris presiding over the land of the dead, and out of this pond is a grapevine that comes after him. Now, the grape in this particular context represents the body of Osiris. So when that red grape is crushed, that's the blood issuing forth from the dismembered body of Osiris. So the fact that he is now enthroned with integral grape, I mean, the grapes are whole, his body's now been restored. So the grapes have this symbol, they represent what happened to him in the past if you question, but now since he's whole, it's the entire grape is in one place. And added to that is the vegetable component. It's a multi-layered component in Egypt because the resurrection of Osiris is compared to the planting of vegetation. And we have what's known as the Festival of Koyak. In an Egyptian calendar, it happens late September, early October. That's after the Nile River has flooded. The land is covered with alluvial soil. You plant a dead seed, and during the course of that month, the seed sprouts. So what they're saying is we can show the birth of Osiris allegorically by comparing him to the floral kingdom. And the way you do that on one stele is to show a mound with Osiris in it. He's named Wezer. Then we have a flower pot and a tree sprouting. But when the Festival of Koyak is really performed, the Egyptians make an effigy, an image of Osiris. Think of it as a mold that you use for a cookie cutter. They fill it with alluvial soil. Then they put the seeds in it. And at that moment in late September, they water it, put it in a dry, dark place. And during the course of Koyak, the seeds sprout. And that gives everybody another way of looking at the way he is resurrected. And the third element that comes into this is Osiris is likened to the light. He is sometimes called Weni Nefer, the good or the beautiful light. He's sometimes called Nekpa Weni, the Lord of the light. And what that indicates is in Dendera, there's no electricity, so you've got to be able to get light into the dark bowels of the temple. So one of the ways you do that on this stairway is you cut a hole in the outside wall and the light comes in and it illuminates the stairway during the day. Now, in the case of Osiris, he is up on the roof. And these are scenes, this scene, that is on top of the procession that I showed you earlier with the people carrying the jars. And it is open to the ceiling. And here we have Osiris on the bare dead. And the idea being when the morning sun comes through that crack in the ceiling, Osiris is alive. And this is like some people to make the connection. Yeah, right? Right? If you read the New Testament, Christ said, I am the light of the world. And since Osiris is the Lord of the light, there are people that try to make that connection as well. But keep this in mind, because preliminarily, probability. No, I'm not. I have not betting the mortgage on this yet. Now, the interesting thing about this for me, there is not a single ancient Egyptian source, not one, that gives you the entire biography of Osiris from the time he is born until the time he is resurrected. Not one. And that's why I showed you today one scene with the grapes from the Dynasty 18, another scene, his body part being together from the 19th dynasty. We have to wait until the priest of Apollo named Plutarch, writing in Greek in the 2nd century AD, writes the Moralia, in which we have Isis and Osiris as part of it. And here's where it gets interesting. When you read Plutarch, you understand it is an allegorical reading of the Egyptian deities as cosmogenic principles in which Isis serves as an intermediary between this world and the absolute transcendent God. So she ministers to Osiris, but that's taken not literally, but figuratively, because Plutarch identifies the God that Isis is serving as our intermediary with the demiurge that is the creator of the universe in Plato's Timaeus, who is the father and creator of everything. And then it gets even more interesting because I don't have the passage on the screen, but in Day is a Day, chapter 76 to 78, Plutarch describes what resonates with the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, verse 27, where Christ is described as the living God. In so doing, there's a disconnect between the body of Osiris and his soul. That means a natural death liberates souls formerly enclosed within the body and shackled by passions for the true life far removed from the world of bodies. So the point is, don't read the tale of Osiris or Dionysus as a story. Try to go behind the story to see what's really happening, because these Greek authors and commentators are using those myths as allegorical myths to talk about something much more profound. And we have to do the same thing when we unpack Dionysus. I show you in Palermo to begin with, Zeus and his wife Hera. After he married a couple of Olympias, the king and queen of gods. And Zeus has a straying eye. He has a lot of trysts, and one of them involves Semele. Again, we don't have Zeus actually copulated with Semele, so I show you a painting by Rubens to give you the idea of what's happening. In the case of Dionysus, his birth is miraculous. And we look at texts that we have, Orphic texts, that tell us a little bit about the life of Osiris. Zeus mated with his daughter Persephone, who bore a son, Zagreus, and Zagreus is another name for Dionysus. Hera, in her jealousy, aroused the Titans to attack the child Dionysus. These monstrous beings, the Titans, the giants, their faces whitened with chalk, attacked the infant Dionysus as he was looking in a mirror and tried to distract him by looking in the mirror. They gave him other toys before they cut him to pieces with their knives. But the heart of the infant god was saved and brought to Zeus by Athena, and Dionysus was born again, swallowed by Zeus, and begotten on Semele. Zeus was angry at the Titans and destroyed them with his thunder and lightning, but from their ashes mankind arose. And commentators on this Orphic hymn, which some people said maybe in Delphi, are very, very aware of the fact that the dismemberment and rememberment of Dionysus smacks of what happened to the god Osiris. And when Dionysus is born, he is born by being cut from the thigh of Zeus. We have a sarcophagus fragment showing the thigh of Zeus being cut. Dionysus is here, and here we have a vase in the collection of the Tampa Museum, which was the poster of this particular lecture, in which we have a scene of the birth of Dionysus, and he's being baptized in the bottom registers. As Dionysus is a neonate, he has to be protected because his crying might be a siren that alerts parents to the fact that that's where he is, and she can extract her vengeance on him for being a little innocent children of husband. So they bring Dionysus to the nymphs. The statue that you see on the left-hand side in the Museum of Olympia shows the infant Dionysus in the arms of Hermes, who's going to bring him to the nymphs. And this statue may very well be a 4th century original Greek sculpture by Praxiteles. There's a debate about that. And we have a more elaborate scene from the house of Ion in Paphos, where the child is brought. He's in a company of many, many different deities, and his baptismal washing is being prepared. So there are individuals that are associating the baptism of Dionysus with the baptism of the Christ in the Jordan River by John the Baptist. There's an ancillary myth to this as well, and that is that Dionysus at one stage goes to Hades. And the reason he goes there is to rescue Semele from the woman whom he fathered the child. So he goes down to get his lover. And again, that's maybe a Christian parallel, because if you read the New Testament, take carefully. You read, he who ascends also descends, he who descends also ascends. So there are some people who want to make a connection between the journey of Dionysus and the Christ during the Passion. And then we have this famous episode of Dionysus in the East. And the problem here is Zeus is upset with the citizens of the subcontinent of India because they're not worshiping. So Zeus says, okay, my dear beloved son, go to India and force these people to recognize me. So Dionysus dutifully goes and gets everybody in a back frenzy. There's a battle that takes place. A lot of lives are lost. Dionysus introduces wine to the subcontinent for the first time. And then Dionysus, having accomplished his mission, comes back. And there are some people that say, resurrection symbol, because the sun comes from the east. And Dionysus now coming from the east. So Dionysus must be linked to life. The way Christ is linked to life, the way Osiris is. Probably. Now, Dionysus has to be related because there are hundreds of Roman period sarcophagi in which Dionysus imagery is shown. And so it makes no sense if you have imagery on a funerary object that are not funerary related. And it's our task this afternoon to try to figure that out for all of us. But before we do that, we compare the principal events in the life of the third individual, and that is the life of Christ. His birth is absolutely miraculous. The Archangel Gabriel announces the pregnancy. We will return to that episode in a moment. And then Christ is born. Those of us who believe, we just celebrated the Christmas holiday not too very, very long ago. And as Christ grows up, he is baptized in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, that people say has correspondences with the baptism of Dionysus. And then Christ is crucified, and then he is resurrected. And here we have to make a distinction. The body of Osiris is dismembered. The body of Dionysus is dismembered. The corpse of Christ is not. Because if you read the New Testament accounts, the officials wanted to know if Christ was dead on the cross. Because if he was still alive, they were going to break his legs off. And that never happened. So the idea that the resurrection deities of Osiris and Dionysus are like Christ, we don't have the dismemberment component in the Christology of Christ. And when you put all of this on a tic-tac-toe board, there's very, very little intersection. That it's hard to find every box for every principal deity. And then let's review. We look at the grape. The grape represents the body of Osiris. The grape represents the vehicle that people drink that trigger their frenzy. And the grape represents part of the Eucharist of the Christian religion. The only common denominator here is a grape. And the grape is ubiquitous in the ancient world. When you look at Santa Costanza decorating a church, or when you look at the sarcophagus in the Getty Museum, scenes such as these grape scenes serve both polytheists and Christians by drawing upon the same Dionysic imagery that had already been carved for centuries in different contexts, but both sacred and prophetic. It was up to the paying customer, who's the viewer, to interpret the common images as they saw fit or as they wished, because in every case, there is no accompanying inscription that tells us what we're looking at. So here again, we have this wonderful free association exercise. We got grapes all over the place. They've got to be Christian. They've got to be related. And so at this point in the lecture, I have to go up to Branko and share with you a conversation we had over the phone when he asked me to come give this lecture. And he said, I don't know about that, Barbara, because you may be dealing with free association exercise that is not going to result in anything positive. So does that mean I have to stand up here and say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry you gave up a Sunday for a Super Bowl playoff to hear a lecture that can't be proven? But I'm Dr. Bob! And we're going to try to unpack this so that what is problem becomes more plausible. And we look at the back eye. One of the last plays Euripides ever wrote, 405 BC. It's been staged many times. There's no academic consensus about what this play means, let alone what the intentions of Euripides were for writing it in the first place. Its themes address the rites and rituals of Dionysus. Those rites and rituals demand reverence from people all over the world. Dionysus manifests his greatness via his miracles, which accompany his presence, and his magnificent gifts to humanity include happiness, we'll get to the screen, and he makes it before you. That's what Dionysus brought. And when you read this play, there are individuals in the play that recognize who Dionysus is. And there's Pentheus, who doesn't recognize him, refuses to recognize him. And Dionysus, because he's not recognized, sends Pentheus' mother out into the woods with a bunch of Bacchus, and she's responsible for murdering her own son. The mystical workings of Dionysus. Now, it gets even more complicated. In the 6th century, and we have literary evidence that demonstrates this, The festival of Koyak, that is the vegetable festival of Dionysus being born from seeds, makes connections with the great Dionysus. So that dismemberment of Dionysus starts to melt. In the 5th century, Herodotus associates Osiris with Egyptian Dionysus. Herodotus is reticent to speak about the death of Osiris, but similarities between the rites of Osiris and the Greek mysteries are very, very common. And what's amazing, the French have been excavating at North Karnak for decades. And North Karnak is populated with a number of chapels dedicated to different manifestations of the god Osiris. And just recently, those texts dealing with Osiris have been read in association with Herodotus' account. And now we understand what Herodotus has to say about Osiris is based in reality. It is not a fairy tale like we thought 10 years ago. So Herodotus knows something about Osiris that we're not aware of by looking at the imagery. And in the late 4th and 5th century, Plato says, Dionysus is able to restore souls of humans to their former divine status through divine enthusiasm, but only if humans receive this enthusiasm appropriately, not by means of enthusiastic drunkenness, but through philosophical initiation. And this reminds us that Isis is the intermediary to get you to understand the demiurge. In the 1st century, 3 Maccabees, written in Greek, Dionysus is cast as the major rival of Yahweh, each of whom can offer salvation and deliverance to their respective followers. So if you read the literary testimonies, you can start to see that we can come up with connective tissue. And the connective tissue is going to be revealed in the most spectacular way. In Egypt, during the Roman imperial period, we have an episode called the Hellenization of civilization. There is an episode of illiteracy. Native Egyptians forget how to write in their own native language, documented by Dionysos. New architectural forms are introduced. There's a conscious effort to conceal pharaonic monuments. And here in Karnak, the great temple to the god Amun, they built a Roman bath in front of it. You only see the Roman bath in ruins. Just think in your mind's eye what this rumors, the bath of Caracalla, why is it well? You visit Karnak, I can't see the Egyptian temple and do see with bath. And then you got people coming to Karnak. They're going to have sprints. They're not going to go to the temple proper. And then you have the relegation of pharaonic deities, a radical change in diet. Wine becomes the beverage of choice. And if you could get an Egyptian from the 18th dynasty to come to Roman Egypt and sit down in a 5-star restaurant, a guy would not know what he was eating because the diet was completely Greek. And as a result, Greek becomes the dominant language. And it is in that context that we have to understand Plutarch's writing. And we see Dionysus in the ascendancy. And here we have a sarcophagus in the collections of the Gondor Foundation in Geneva, one of the more spectacular of all of the Dionysus sarcophagi that I showed. Now, Greek is in the ascent. The roots of linking Dionysus and Osiris have already been laid. And we have to go now to a little tiny town, Panopolis, in Upper Egypt. Today, just the cemeteries of Panopolis are visible. But in its heyday, in the Roman imperial period, this had to be one of the ancient world's greatest think tanks. Greatest think tanks. Some of the greatest minds of the ancient world grew up in Panopolis. And one of those great minds is Zosimus of Panopolis, sometimes called Zosimus Aegyptiacus, florid in the 4th century AD. And he wrote a book called On Virtue. And one of the chapters of On Virtue is on the composition of the waters. Plural, please. Waters, not plural. It contains the so-called visions or dreams that are 28 chapters devoted to what we think is alchemy and dedicated to one Theosophia whom we don't know. The preface of this, waters and their changes, their separation from their union with bodies which contain them. What does that mean? We look at mummification. We look at Osiris. The mysteries of Zosis of Panopolis, Osiris, waters and their changes, their separation from their union with bodies which contain them. In the mummification process, and I use Merneptah as my model, the first thing you do is dehydrate the body. Desiccate it. But then you have to rehydrate it in order for it to be able to gain its flexibility and to become alive again. And so we have a sarcophagus in Hildesheim where you see the various priests ministering to try to rehydrate him. And that leaves Zosimus to allegorically suggest that the desiccation and hydration of the body of Osiris is the key to transforming matter. And in the medieval period, the body of Osiris was transformed into flasks. So the next time you're home and you're having a sip of brandy, thank Osiris for that. Because without Zosimus and the alchemic tradition, we would not have that distilled beverage. And we get even closer because in Zosimus's discussions, he calls the transformation that he's doing the great work. And in the festival of Koyak, the transformation of Osiris is likewise called the great work, the great transformation. And so what we see here in sum is the process of mummification, desiccation, hydration, transforms the deceased into an Akh, a glorified spirit with divine characteristics, including skin of gold. So in a cryptic fashion, Zosimus becomes an eyewitness to such a transformation with the aid of an unusual piece of furniture. He gets a snake that he sacrifices, and with the remains, he builds a stool, and with that stool, climbs up, peers over a wall, and watches successively as a man of copper turns into a man of silver, over the course of time turns into a man of gold. So the legend of Osiris, dismembered, put back together again, resurrected, is an allegorical message. Okay? It's an allegorical message. And Zosimus uses it as the basis for what is going to become medieval alchemist theory. But it gets worse. We look now at Panopolis, which is here, and we want to look at Antinoe, which is here. They're about a couple hours away, maybe a 2-3 hour drive by car. And then Tipolis and Antinoe was home to hundreds of mummies that were excavated in the last century. But the mummies are interesting because they are not wrapped in bandages. They're simply bundled in drapery and used clothing and curtains. And one of those curtains from Antiquities is this magnificent textile representing characters from the legend of Dionysos. And I compare the textile in Abexviertel in Switzerland with the sarcophagus in the Condor Foundation, and as glorious as this sarcophagus is, it pales in comparison with this textile, because this textile is 7.5 feet tall, 23 feet long. It almost doesn't fit on the wall in which it is revealed. Huge. So what? It's a body buried in a huge shroud. Okay. With it was found this text, also in Dionysos. The earliest representation of the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. So the body buried in its grave was wrapped in a linen garment depicting the Annunciation, and that was it. I need that shit out there because it's so cold in Florida. In Dionysos shroud. And we know that this is the birth of Christ, the Annunciation, because here is the textile. We have the star and the moon. Here we have Gabriel without wings. And we know it's Gabriel because we have the Greek, Haile Maria, Hail Mary, Ave Maria. We know that's what's going on. And here we have a representation of the Virgin Mary. She is at a scream, and her picture is knocked over, metaphorically being the womb that is now going to carry the Christ child. So we have the earliest and uncanonical representation of the Annunciation wrapped in this Dionysiac shroud. And so you can tell me, hey, we know that Theophilus, one of the great early Christian fathers of Alexandria, who persecuted the pagans and was responsible to destroy the temple of Serapis in Alexandria. And he was accused by his co-religionists of being thin-headed, a lover of things Greek. And Theophilus surrounded himself with Greek manuscripts, Greek statues, Greek objects. Not because he was a pagan, but because he was Greek. And he wanted his power of his Hellenic tradition. So you could argue that the person that was buried in this shroud was very proud of his Greek heritage. And this had nothing whatsoever to do with Christianity. You could be wrong. We go back to Panopolis, and we now go to Nonus of Panopolis, another one of these seminal thinkers from a city that no one thinks is a think tank. And Nonus writes the Dionysiac, the Tales of Dionysus. It is the longest Greek epic to have ever survived from antiquity. 48 chapters of books, twice as long as the combined length of either the Iliad or the Odyssey. And it's everything you ever want to know about Dionysus. It would serve as a great PhD dissertation. And it emphasizes what were the resources at Panopolis that enabled Zosimus to so thoroughly understand the nature of Osiris that could lead him to the transformation of material And what kind of library was there that Notice could go and write the longest epic ever preserved from antiquity, all about Dionysus? That city just had to have been incredible. And here in the Dionysiac, we remember what Plato had to say. Dionysus is able to restore the souls of humans to their former divine status through divine enthusiasm, but only if humans receive this enthusiasm appropriately, not by means of enthusiastic drunkenness, but through philosophical initiation. What does Notice know that we don't? Notice, who wrote the Dionysiac, now writes Metabolin Tokata Ioanni Agios Anglios, a paraphrase of the Gospel of St. John. Now, I don't know, we have some people here that are college professors. After I learned grammar as an undergraduate, my first Greek was the text of John, in our hand, in our language. In the beginning was the Word. And I suppose that for early Christians, that was the first scripture that they also read. And Notice is now saying, I want to tell you what this is that you are reading. And remember that he just wrote the longest epic ever on Dionysus. And so in his exegetical or critical interpretation, demonstrates that Notice's use of mystery terminology is more than rhetorical ornament. The terms refer specifically to the mysteries of Jesus. Christ introduces followers into a new dimension of life and worship, and that enables them to commune with God. And this communion is portrayed as falling into a Dionysiac frenzy, being initiated into secret rites. So now I want to tell there's anyone in here, because we have textual information that Dionysus is between Osiris and Christ. And it's important that we look at the entire cultural ambiance in which our ancient heritage is brought to us, so we can have a better understanding of how to interpret it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, and if I have any breath left, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, Bob, for this spectacular performance. I could not have wished for any better event to open our gallery. It's about life, it's about death, it's about rebirth. So everything that we could wish for. And just like the exhibition upstairs is trying to show the diversity of the ancient world, the interconnections, the mutual influence back and forth, I think that you've done a stellar job using Dionysus as an example of how these different worlds were not isolated, they were interacting, they were influencing each other, and that what we think, Dionysus, god of wine, well, and maybe some other things like dying and being reborn, spectacular, really. Thank you so much.